My name is Dustin Bankson, and I am the Operations Project Manager for the Willamette Valley and Rogue Basin projects. I have been in the Willamette system in various roles since 1993. And so, with that perspective in mind, I have had an opportunity to see tremendous change in the increasing complexity in what it takes to operate our system. And as the conditions change, as that complexity increases, so do the challenges and the trade-offs that we make to try to operate this system in ways that comply with the law, that provide the maximum benefits, that maintain public safety downstream. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But as we work forward tonight, know that these are very challenging issues to work through. And part of that process is hearing from you to do the very best we can to shape our alternatives in ways that reflect the best interests of the public and the requirements that we have to manage to. Next slide, Kelly. So we're going to talk a little bit about, and I want to provide, go to the slide 4, please. I'm going to provide an overview of the Willamette system. Again, just because I want to make sure that everybody starts from a common point, we typically start there, but then we'll spend the majority of our time talking about kind of the key points in the SEIS, the new alternative that we're required to evaluate ceasing hydropower in the Willamette system, and then the additional requirement that came to us in the 2024 BIOP that involves a drawdown of Detroit Reservoir for fish passage until a structural alternative is available. And then again, we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. Next slide, Kelly. I throw this one in because I love the picture, and I think it's a reminder of how different the Willamette Valley would look, how altered the system is for all of the infrastructure, the people, the things that we have in place today. And the projects themselves were developed over time, but certainly have shaped and modified the way that the valley functions. The safety of the public downstream is paramount and certainly tied to the way we operate. Our history, and if you bump to the next slide, Kelly, that rationale and our authorities to operate were also in evolution over time, starting in the late 30s when the Corps was given authority to study what could be done around this regular and very impactful flooding of the valley floor. And the end result of that study was the authorization of the first 5 dams and storage reservoirs in the Willamette. And that term, the authority of the authorization, is very important as we look at what's being evaluated in the EIS and the SEIS. We need 2 things. We need an authority, one, to construct the facility or what we operate it for, and then we need the appropriation piece, the dollars to follow through on that authority. Those authorities continued to evolve, and when construction was complete, we saw that additional structures were authorized in the 40s and in the early 60s. And at that same time, our authorities were added to as well. So you saw things like recreation authorities for the Corps being added during subsequent flood control acts. The system as we kind of see it today was complete in the late 60s, and we have operated with largely the same infrastructure. There have been some more recent additions to that infrastructure, but for our primary purposes, we're using the very same infrastructure that we've had since the beginning of the project, right? And so as we kind of work through and manage to those authorities, those represent our ability to do things. They represent our legal requirements. They represent how we manage risk and safety to people downstream. Next slide, Kelly. So we talk, and these dams are all, as you recognize them today, they're all slightly different, both in terms of how they are kind of perched within the valley and the impacts or benefits that they can provide on tributary flows and main stem targets, all slightly different in terms of design. So as we work through challenges, whether they're management of flow or management of water quality or management of fish passage, each of these dams are a bit unique, and it's very complicated to communicate and build understanding around what we can and can't do with existing infrastructure. And again, these are built over time, so that infrastructure itself is getting older. And as we change operations to this system, we're also responsible to ensure that what we're doing doesn't increase risk, right? Increase risk to those people, those 2/3 of the population of Oregon that live in the Willamette Valley downstream of one or several of these dams. Next slide. While the dams are the most obvious features, there are a number of other features associated with the Willamette Valley project, including fish mitigation hatcheries that were built kind of in recognition of lost habitat or passage at some of our dams. There's an authority for a navigation channel going from the Portland Harbor all the way to Corvallis that, while navigation never really materialized, is still a part of the original authorities for the project. Willamette Falls locks, which I think most folks are familiar with, and then over hundreds of miles of bank protection that in many cases are largely invisible, but we've had infrastructure in the valley develop over time behind some of those stabilization projects, and those are a unique issue for us as we try to manage risk and flow, and as people, communities, state, local agencies manage risk downstream. Next slide. So we do this, and I mentioned authorities. So each one of our projects has an authorized purpose, and you've heard it referred to as a multi-purpose project earlier in the presentation. But that primary purpose for us is flood risk management, right? With the population at risk downstream, all of our dams essentially are high hazard dams, not based on their condition, but based on what they're protecting or the population at risk downstream. So that flood risk management mission is always primary as we look at these other authorities or authorized purposes and try to balance the best we can the relationship to the benefits and meeting our legal requirements. So whether it's hydropower, navigation, water quality, irrigation, these are all authorized purpose, federally authorized purposes baked into those authorizations I mentioned earlier. One of those authorizations or one of those functions, hydropower, is being evaluated, and Congress has asked us to do that. All of those other authorized purposes are still important, they're still necessary, and things we still have to manage for regardless of the decision around that analysis. Next slide. So how do we manage this and how do we balance these? And this is an example of what we call the water control diagram. I think most folks refer to as the rule curve, but it is the way that we balance risk over time, seasonally, and then try to maximize the benefits through use of conservation storage. You may have seen this before, but if you look at the top part of the diagram, you see us moving seasonally between major flood season, conservation season, major flood season again at the end, and months of the year on the bottom. And so if you follow it from January, beginning in February, as the flood risk goes down, we slowly begin to fill these pools, trying to store as much water as we can within the limits of our infrastructure, our legal authorities, and other, what nature brings us to work with in terms of spring runoff. And then we peak that storage somewhere in mid-May. And after that period, when we have kind of the maximum amount of water available that we'll have for the year, we try to balance the use of that to maximize those benefits and meet those legal requirements until, again, we intersect that curve late in the year and start to pull those pools down historically for the purposes of flood storage or flood risk management. Now that back end of the curve, as you see it in October, November, and December at some of our projects looks different now because we are trying to achieve operational fish passage by pulling those pools down lower, below those minimum conservation pools, and Kathy will explain that in a little bit. But that is a change, which has in some ways a benefit to how much flood storage we have available, but there are impacts associated with those operations as well that we're working to manage. And then, what sometimes gets missed is that, there's a strong driver for us to store that water every year for the benefit of fish, for the benefit of public use, municipal supply, etc. And so we're really pulling hard to get that water in the system early in the spring, both for fish passage and for all of those other downstream purposes. So that balance, which has worked very well for us over time in terms of managing risk, is in flux, right? We're continuing to try to optimize and work through how we manage these individual projects and the storage we have available to meet our objectives. Next slide. The thing that I would say is that, we'll talk about things like adaptive management And I've talked about how we meet our authorized purposes, and we're trying to balance. We have always done this with collaboration from a number of agencies and partners, trying to understand in the context of a given year, and every year is different, how we can best achieve objectives, how we can best manage risk, and how we articulate those trade-offs and learn from them in the future. The snapshot on the right is the Willamette teacup diagram. It's a very helpful diagram to understand where we are in any season, whether your interest is recreation, your interest is flood risk management, or if you're looking at our operations and you want to understand water quality impacts, all of those little orange hash marks represent dams. And if you were to click on one, and I'll use Green Peter as an example, you can see where we are in terms of the pool elevation and what the forecast is. You can see our inflows and outflows. You can also see turbidity, turbidity in prior years, turbidity at certain locations, to get a reference of how we're operating and what those impacts are in the basin that you're interested in. So I would strongly encourage you to find the Willamette teacup diagram and link to that. It is a really good way to stay current on the operation of the system. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Warner, who's been our technical person, kind of technical lead for the Willamette SEIS, and she can walk us through kind of the major aspects of what we're here to talk about today. Kathy?
All right, thanks much, Dustin. Just a thumbs up if everyone can hear okay. All right, so just a brief overview of where we've been so far this year in 2025 in terms of these documents. So in April of 2025, we published the final environmental impact statement, and that was started in 2019. So that document, and in that document, we analyzed the environmental and social benefits from 7 different alternatives, which are ways to operate the system of dams and reservoirs. These alternatives that we looked at included operational and structural measures, and measures are, again, a way to improve flow, water quality, especially namely temperature and total dissolved gas, and then as well as fish passage, both upstream and downstream passage. In the final EIS, the Corps identified a preferred alternative, and in that preferred alternative, what we included a combination of operations and structures to provide for fish passage, for downstream passage, and then as well as for temperature management. We also included a flow regime for for flow management for flows downstream of the dams. This EIS included an analysis of those impacts over a 30-year time frame. It's important to note this final environmental impact statement also included a set of interim operations that we would be conducting until the long-term features identified in that preferred alternative are online and working. So in May of 2025, we signed a record of decision, which is making a decision on what we're going to do of what we identified in the EIS. So in May, we signed that document identifying what we're going to do, but just for the interim operations for 2025. And we'll get to why we just did that one set of interim operations. So what we're going to be looking at doing is signing another record of decision in early 2026. Next slide, please. Sorry, as I'm working on there we go. So why are we preparing this document when we just finished one this spring? I have 2 reasons for that. So in January 2025, the president signed into law something called the Water Resources Development Act of 2024. And in that document, Section 1326 includes a requirement that the Corps not complete our environmental review of the system until we formally analyze an alternative that includes ceasing hydropower operations and ceasing or ending hydropower operations at the Willamette system dams. The second reason is that in December of 2024, the National Marine Fisheries Service issued a biological opinion on the operations and maintenance of the system. And in that document, it includes a deeper drawdown of Detroit Reservoir. And so that was not included in our final environmental impact statement. So we need to identify what the effects of that operation are going to be. Next slide. All right. So a document, an environmental impact statement is what EIS stands for, has a purpose and need. Why are we doing this? What is our purpose for doing it? And the supplemental EIS purpose and need is the same as what was for the final environmental impact statement. And that is the continued operation and maintenance of the Willamette Valley system of dams and reservoirs for two things: for specific authorized project purposes and in compliance with the Endangered Species Act. So as part of our Endangered Species Act compliance, we consulted with the National Marine Fisheries Service. And in December, that agency issued a biological opinion. So with this supplemental environmental impact statement, that will include the requirements of the biological opinion. Next slide. All right, so jumping right into the ceasing hydropower operation aspect of the SEIS. So we've identified this as alternative 6, and that's the identification and the name of what you'll see in the document. And that is ending hydropower operations at the dams. So a couple things we have to do beforehand is figure out, well, how are we going to end those operations of the dam and still operate the dams themselves? So on the left side, you'll see some options that were considered, but they were screened out due to dam safety risks. So this includes partial deauthorization, which maintains hydropower generation at the dam, but just in a very limited manner and enough to power the dams themselves, keep the lights going, being able to operate the gates on the spillway and the different features and parts of the dam itself. The second is full deauthorization, and that means stopping all power generation and decommissioning or plugging the outlets, which is called the penstock. So no water would be able to go through that outlet of the dam. And those two specifically were ruled out because we wouldn't be able to safely inspect the rest of the dam without being able to use those penstocks in that outlet at full capacity. A third option under that category was a new outlet, developing and putting a whole new hole and outlet through the dam. And that was identified to have increased dam safety risk as well. So neither of those options were going to work to be able to keep operating the dams, but have no hydropower. Another item that has come up is dam removal. So the Congress asked us to just cease hydropower operations, not to cease all operations of the dams. And that's what dam removal would do. But there wouldn't be no more flood risk management and no more of the other authorized purposes as well. So that was beyond the scope of this document and this effort. What is included in the EIS supplemental environmental impact statement is a full deauthorization, but reconfiguring those penstock outlets to be able to still put the flow through those that outlet and that facility. So this is the only one that the Corps has considered was implementable given the dam safety requirements. So now that we now that we developed how we were going to cease hydropower but continuing to operate, we needed to figure out the rest of the aspect of this alternative to still be in compliance with the the Endangered Species Act. Next slide. All right. So with that, we ceasing hydropower and just kind of identifying some of those key elements of this alternative. So removing and decommissioning all the infrastructure associated with hydropower. We still have to provide fish passage and water temperature management. We still have to continue to operate for all the other authorized purposes: flood risk management, fish and wildlife, irrigation, and municipal industrial water supply. Another item here is Dorena Dam would still continue to produce hydropower. That facility is a non-federal, it's a private hydropower generation facility, so that would continue. So I want to also note here, kind of zoning in on that diagram on the bottom, that if we cease hydropower operations, we still have to fill the reservoirs for the other authorized purposes. recreation, fish and wildlife, water supply, and irrigation. And so Congress, in asking us to cease operations of hydropower, didn't say cease hydro operations for these other authorized purposes. So that's why we still need to be able to fill the pool and the reservoirs themselves. Next slide. So in that regard, we included actions for fish passage and water quality that are identified in the biological opinion from National Marine Fisheries Service, as well as a flow management regime that was identified in that document as well. So some key features of Alternative 6 are the water temperature and downstream passage at Detroit. We have an adult fish facility at Green Peter to bring the fish upstream of the dam. And then to get fish downstream of the dam at Green Peter, we're looking at a spring spill operation to pass fish over the spillway, and then a fall drawdown at Green Peter as well. And that green drawdown operation is what we are currently doing under an interim operation standpoint. At the Cougar is the more extreme. We have a fall drawdown and a spring drawdown down to the diversion tunnel elevation, and this would require a new structure as well to be able to continue operating that dam in a safe manner. We'd also include a fish passage structure at Lookout Point and some Pacific lamprey passage features at the adult fish facilities. Next slide. Keying in on the specific aspect of the Alternative 6, which is ceasing hydropower, to be able to safely use the outlets and the penstock, we would need to modify those outlets and the pipes through the dam to safely put water through them without using a turbine. So the turbine turns the energy in the water into energy hydropower. And so without the turbine, we would need to dissipate that energy and reconfigure the penstocks. We would also be decommissioning all the hydropower infrastructure and reconfiguring the powerhouse systems. Another key feature there is replacing the power that is generated at the dam, but now we don't have that power, so we have to replace that power to continue to be able to operate the dam, and as well as any auxiliary features and facilities. So quick summary of effects on this alternative that we've identified and that are listed and described in much more detail in the EIS, in the supplemental EIS. No hydropower generation. There would also be a lower downstream survival compared to Alternative 5, which is identified as a preferred alternative in that final EIS document. And that's due to the reconfigured penstocks. So some fish would still elude the fish passage structures and go through these penstock outlets, which would have a decreased survival rate relative to a straight turbine. There'd also be increased total dissolved gas downstream of the dams due to the energy dissipation devices. And it would be the highest cost. So it would have all of the features in our preferred alternative, as well as then an added cost to decommission the hydropower infrastructure, as well as reconfigure the outlets. Let's go into the interim operations. So the interim operations is a full set of actions that we're going to be taking until a long-term solution is in place. And so this is the full list of the interim operations, but I want to take the time here to zone in onto the Detroit operation. And that is what's new from the FEIS to this document itself that we're supplementing. And that's the Detroit late fall drawdown at Detroit Dam on the North Sanium. Next slide. All right. So the Detroit drawdown is designed to provide a surface route for fish passage. And that's a requirement in the 2024 biological opinion issued by the National Marine Fisheries Service. So as we draw the reservoir down, that outlet or the regulating outlet becomes more available to the fish and a safer passage route for them. Couple key defining elements on this document. So we are required to draw the reservoir down to an elevation 1395 feet. And that is 55 feet lower than our winter elevation. As Dustin talked about earlier, we draw the reservoirs down every fall and have it at their lowest flood risk management level by December 1. And that elevation is only at 55 feet higher than what we're going to be drawing it down to. I want to note as well that we have drawn the reservoir down in the past to about 1425, which then this drawdown for Fish Passage would be about 30 feet lower than that elevation. So what we're looking at for an implementation details and what we're proposing is that it would be a December timeframe. So we're not going to be drawing down the reservoir early, cutting into recreation and from a temperature perspective as well. So looking at that December 1 timeframe to start the drawdown. So we would be drawing down to that elevation, but we're not going to do that in the first year. So we are looking at doing a stepwise approach. So draw it down incrementally, a certain amount each year and in the first year, and pausing. And what is the turbidity looking like? How is it going to be? So we're going to be doing that in an adaptive management perspective. Next slide. Okay. So this, honing in on that part and the turbidity. I know we've heard a lot about a concern from the drinking water perspective and water supply and irrigation. And the graph on the right, the figure on the right hand of the slide, is a comparison between Green Peter and Detroit reservoirs. So on top is Green Peter, and on the bottom figure is the Detroit reservoir. And the three colors, the blue outline, kind of that area, is this normal summer pool elevation. And that's that full extent at full pool. The next one you'll see is yellow, and that is the typical winter winter elevation extent of the reservoir during the winter. The next one is that gray shade, and that is what the drawdown surface area of the reservoir would look like at the target elevation. And what you'll see on the comparison of these two is that the Green Peter reservoir, the remaining reservoir, is really quite small relative to its normal winter pool elevation. In comparison at Detroit, you'll see that there's very little of that yellow shading exposed, and that's because the drawdown elevation and the extent of the remaining pool at that drawdown elevation is actually quite large. So there's not much of a difference from an aerial extent of the reservoir. And so with that means less reservoir sediment and reservoir bed exposed and less sediment to be eroded during that drawdown. Next slide. The next topic we've heard and concern is recreation. So the timing of this drawdown is going to be, or would be, in the late fall, early winter. And so looking at doing that for multiple reasons, impacts to storage and water temperatures and fish passage. And that's why that's the time we're looking at it there. So without getting into the absolute details of this figure, just looking at it, that the lower lines are showing that, 95% of the time, there will not be an impact to that summer recreation time period. In those really dry years, when we've drawn the reservoir down for the fish passage operation, there's going to be an impact to refilling the reservoir, but that's not significantly different than what happens in dry years under current operations. Under years like 2015, the reservoir is not, the Corps is not able to refill the reservoir anyway, because that lack of rain that is needed in this late winter and spring to refill the reservoir. And so while the drawdown will affect that low level boat ramp during the winter timeframe and during that drawdown operation itself, the reservoir would refill. And so during dry years, just like under current operations, that Mongold boat ramp would be available, but upper boat ramps would not be available because of that just dry conditions. And want to point out that in-season management would also be able to help mitigate any of the effects of dry year, just as we do now. we're working with other agencies and internally looking at forecasts and how can we help refill the reservoir as much as possible. Because that reservoir is needed for multiple purposes, water supply, irrigation, and downstream flows as well, which are very important. Next slide. All right, so that's what I have on the items in the supplemental impact statement, that ceasing hydropower operations and the addition of Detroit drawdown to the interim operations. And as you're looking in the document, chapter 3 is where the effects are analyzed and described, and the Detroit drawdown is going to be part of each subsection in chapter 3 under the term heading interim operations. So that's where you will find the effects of that drawdown operation. And with that, just want to identify and thank our cooperating agencies that have helped with the final EIS as well as the supplemental EIS. And they are listed here. Next slide. All right, and then getting to the heart of it as well, how to comment. How can you provide comments to us on this document? So we have a 45-day comment period that started November 14th. It will run until or through the end of December 29th. So all public comments will be part of that official record, and you can submit comments in multiple ways. So you can email your comments. The email address is listed here. It is also on the website. You can also provide written comments, and the mailing address is located here as well as on our website. The agency contact, Liz Oliver, is our project manager on this project, and you'll see the contact information is there as well. We also have 2 virtual meetings today. This is the second of the 2. We also have in-person meetings coming up. So December 6th, we will have 1 meeting in Detroit, in the community of Detroit, and that's going to be a Saturday morning, 10 to noon. And then we have 2 in-person meetings in Salem on Wednesday, December 10th. We'll have a noon meeting as well as a 5:30 p.m. meeting, and both those meetings will be held at the Salem Broadway Commons. We also included on this slide the website link, as well as a link to a YouTube video with an overview of the process that we're doing here. And do want to say that the slides will be available. We'll get those posted on the website as soon as possible. All right. With that, I will hand it over to Kelly to moderate the Q&A portion.
Thank you. Can you see the slide still? It looks like I may have been kicked off the WebEx or the Teams meeting. I'm still on the phone.
Yeah, the slides went away, Kelly. Let me put up.
Okay.
You want me to just
yeah,
share?
That would be helpful. It also means I can't read out the chat or unlock the chat. So while I join back in, let me just try this here. You may be able to do it, Kathy or others who are organizers, go into the settings and just toggle on turn on the chat. And then folks will be able to actually, are you hearing the reverb as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
And Liz and I are working on getting enabling the chat.
Is this better? Can you all hear me?
I can hear you, Kelly.
Oh, great. Okay. We are back on track. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Just making sure we can turn on the chat here. And then folks can enter in their questions. So hopefully some of you have some at your fingertips ready to enter as soon as we're able to make that happen.
Kelly, are you seeing the slides, or are folks seeing the slides?
I am seeing the slides. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, we were
All
able
right.
to open up that chat.
Great. So this is just a reminder that we are not taking formal comments. We want to make sure that all of them get into the record. Therefore, we're asking that if you would like to make a formal comment, please email it at the willamette.eis@usace.army.mil email address, or send it via snail mail to the address on the slide here. But we will do our best to answer any questions you have tonight. And we'll start with whatever questions come through on the chat. And then if we have a lull, there are a couple of folks, or one person online who's just on phone and can't chat in. So, if we have a lull, then I will call out the last 4 digits of that phone number and allow them to unmute so they can ask their question of the team. So I will give you a minute to collect your thoughts and put in any questions in the chat. Thanks. Not seeing any chats, so I will real quickly. The person calling in from last 4 digits, 4926. I'll allow you to unmute. You'll likely get a notification on your phone saying just press *6 to unmute yourself. If you have a question, feel free. All right, still not seeing any questions. We are on until 6:30, so our folks will just hang out here until either all of the participants have left or someone asks a question or the time runs out. We have a question. Thank you, Carrie. Would you agree that the Corps doesn't see removal of hydropower as beneficial to salmon? Kathy or Greg, do either of you want to respond?
Yeah, I can take a shot at it. Yeah, so Carrie, I think a couple ways to think about this. One is, and we didn't get into it in a lot of detail in this presentation, but a lot of the hydropower that we have at the project right now is pretty integrated into how we manage water. And how we manage water then is pretty integral into doing things for salmon. So that can look like using the existing hydropower to manage total dissolved gas. It's just something we're doing. We're using water coming out of our hydropower units in some locations as the primary source of attraction for fish back to fish facilities. So, I guess the way I think about it is if we remove hydropower, we would need to replace some of the functions that existing program is being used for now to help manage salmon. On the flip side, I know there people, kind of seize on this idea that if we remove hydropower, there's sort of this immediate benefit to downstream fish passage, and intuitively that's sort of what you think, but it's a lot more complicated than that. It's more complicated because in just removing hydro, we do have to come up with a way of passing water, but still sort of, and Kathy hit on this, kind of dissipating that energy. And a lot of the ways of dissipating energy that we've looked into initially are not fish friendly. So I think I wouldn't characterize it as something that we see as a positive or negative related to salmon, but it is one of these situations where you just got to kind of look at the existing functions, what it would take to replace it, what would you get as an outcome if you did take it away, in terms of immediate passage without some sort of additional improvements. And so that's kind of the way I see it, I guess. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that as well. On slide 16, there's a good diagram on that one that kind of shows a cross section of the dam plus the reservoirs. And so just because we're not producing hydropower, it doesn't give us the operational flexibility to do anything at the dams, right? We still need to refill those reservoirs for all of those other authorized purposes. That stored water is really important to many of the authorized purposes, including fish and wildlife itself, as well as water supply and irrigation. And so that's why just using hydropower doesn't change and give us a massive amount of operational flexibility.
Yeah, and just maybe to follow up, she's asking about the cone. So let's just think about what we have at the project already that's sort of a designed downstream fish passage. The way these things typically work is water is moving through some sort of set of pipes, right? And that water, is typically coming from height behind the dam, and then it's moving down through the dam some way, somehow, and then running out. And the reason the pipes usually run out is the run out on those pipes is how we dissipate that energy with the fish in it. So over at Green Peter, we have a simple pipe system that runs through the dam, comes down the face of the dam, and then runs out. And that drops that velocity so that when that water hits the river with the fish, that velocity is such that you don't get injuries. So, think of, say, the penstock that's connected to the units. We don't have that. We don't have that without some sort of modification. And again, these cone valves and some of these other things, again, are not fish-friendly designs, but you would have to add something to that existing infrastructure to modify it in a way that would make it, beneficial to fish passage. So it would be an additional structure, essentially, to make something like that happen. Yeah. So the pipe running out is just that, and this is at Green Peter. So at Green Peter, our pipe that we have for fish passage comes down the face of the dam, and then it stays level essentially for a long period of time. And while that water is level and runs out over that, kind of that flat area in the pipe, it's starting to lose, it's losing energy along the way. And the velocity is dropping. So really what you're trying to do when you have a pipe that's running for some distance down below the dam is really to lose that energy. These cone valves, you're seeing a different way of losing energy. That's kind of the non-fish friendly way to do it. But at our systems where we already have something like this, you're doing it by just running the pipe at grade and letting that energy dissipate over that distance and lose some of that velocity. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thanks for those questions. We still have some time with you all, so if anything else has come to mind while Greg and Kathy have talked. Oh yeah, great. Yes, so do you think the deep drawdowns will be the solution that is needed?
Yeah, when you say that, I'm assuming you're talking about, downstream fish passage. I think what, if you go back and just kind of look at the history of drawdowns in our basin and what we've modeled, drawdowns can be very effective for downstream fish passage. And they work on a really simple concept, which is that these fish are relatively surface oriented. And so with that existing outlet at Detroit, which is the safe route out of the dam, or the safer route out of the dam, which is the regulating outlet, right now it's about 110 feet down. And so what effectively happens is the fish struggle to actually find it. And so really, to get effective fish passage, you need two things to happen, right? Those fish have to find whatever outlet structure that you have, and then it's got to be safe. It's got to be something they survive. And so here at Detroit, the RO is the safer route, but it's deep. And so the only thing the drawdown is doing is narrowing that depth to the outlet so that the fish can more effectively find that outlet. So it's kind of addressing that first issue, the fish finding it. And then it is inherently a more safe route than our turbine units. So yeah, in that regard, I think absolutely, these kinds of things have been done at the Willamette project many, many times. And they have been effective at getting fish out at a higher rate and surviving at a higher rate, generally speaking.
Yeah, I also just want to follow in on that as well, in terms of these drawdowns, like Greg was saying, where we've done them, they do get the fish out. And so we are proposing, and the preferred alternative identified in that FEIS in the spring included structures at a number of the dams, so a structure for downstream fish passage. And that structure allows us to operate the dam and the reservoir to its current, elevations. On full pool, we can fill that pool. And as we're filling the pool, the structure would still be collecting fish. And so it allows the fish passage at multiple reservoir elevations. And so that's why we have that a structure proposed at both Detroit and Lookout Point dams.
Yeah, so each dam has a slightly different turbine configuration, and some of them, as you point out, they're not all the same as it relates to fish passage. So at a lot of our larger dams, Detroit, Lookout, Green Peter, they have a certain turbine design that's called the Francis design, and that generally has lower fish passage survival associated with it. And I won't get into all the details of why that is. But some of our lower head dams, we have what's called a Kaplan design. And that generally has higher fish passage survival associated with it. But those Kaplans are typically used in these lower head applications. So what that means is they're usually used at smaller dams, not big giant dams like Detroit, Lookout, and Green Peter. So the technology's out there, but it doesn't. Again, there's always going to be some mortality associated with that. So if I were to give you some round numbers, generally speaking, with the Francis units, you'd see something like around 50% survival. So it's pretty low. And then like a Kaplan unit, you can see, 75 to, in some cases over 90% survival. So they do a pretty good job, generally speaking. It's just their application it's not a design you can typically use with a high head reservoir like a Detroit, like a Lookout Point or a Green Peter, unfortunately.
Well, we've got about 5 minutes left, and again, we will stay online until till the end of the meeting at 6:30. But I do want to say thank you again for taking the time to learn more about what we're trying to accomplish within the SEIS. I do want to refocus folks one last time. The purpose of these meetings is really orientation, and the way we've structured the in-person meetings is, kind of a modified workshop format where folks can sit down, talk to subject matter experts, and really get to the specifics of the questions they have so that they can structure their comments in the way that they want. And so, we'll be working very hard on those meetings in Detroit on Saturday, the 6th of December, and then Wednesday in Salem at 10 o'clock and at 5:30 to answer those in-depth questions and try to get folks the answers they need. It's a very large document. It's a complex document to work its way through. And so that's the intent of those in-person sessions. So I hope if there are questions you didn't get answered tonight, that you take advantage of those meetings. Yeah, so I'm seeing the question, do you anticipate difficulty in obtaining funding to build the fish structures and at Detroit? And yeah, I think it's very difficult to speculate on that. Carrie, I think the thing we would say is that these interim operations are what we can do, what's been identified that we can do and need to do in the BIOP until we have both the authorization and the appropriation to proceed with those structural alternatives. Those are not things that we have complete control over, but those are the things that we are going to continue to do what we can to improve conditions for fish until we get those questions or until we get clarity on the future for funding and constructing those structures. One last thing. So again, we recorded this session. The session earlier today and the slides will be available on our website. It may take us a little bit of time to edit those and get them posted up, but expect to see those. So if you know of folks that were not able to be at the presentation today and want to see what was discussed, we'll get that posted just as quickly as we can.